and welcome back to the People's Basics, the home of the universal basics. Today, on today's episode, we're talking about an announcement that's been under the, works for a while, but we decided to hold off until the official announcement that came today. Andrew Yang is leaving the Democratic Party, becoming an independent, and forming his new party called the Forward Party. He makes 6 pillars the key to the Forward Party's objectives. He states they are democracy reform, ranked choice voting and open primaries, which he prioritizes there, universal basic income, as you all probably well are aware, that's what he's known for, human-centered capitalism, fact-based governance, effective and modern-day government, and grace and tolerance. He has stated that you do not need to formally leave your party to be able to join this new party, and states that there are going to be things known as forward Democrats, forward Republicans, forward Greens, and forward Libertarians all along the way. His party's first objective is going to be organizing for ballot initiatives for ranked choice voting, as well as trying to recruit a slate of candidates for 2022 congressional races. In this video, I want to provide you all with a little bit of my reaction to this news, as well as just kind of hear where we go from here. Because, so far we've been having so many of the people here come to us from the Yang Gang, and we want to make sure that everyone there knows where our position is regarding the Forward Party as an organization. Before we get into that, for those of you who are new to the channel, we want to remind you all to join this movement that's advocating for the universal basics by subscribing to our network, as well as checking the description section so you can find our Linktree link to get involved in all of our various areas, from sending us things in our mailbag, to joining our team, to joining our organizing community on Discord, and finding all of our content on our website, or just even following us on social media. It is all listed there. So, that being said, what do I think about this first party move? I first want to state on some of the party objectives. I'm a big fan of UBI. Obviously, I'm going to be supportive of that. I'm a big fan of alternative voting methods. We're big advocates of pushing a variety of alternative voting methods. But ranked choice voting is, in my opinion, worse than things like star voting, score voting, or approval voting even, because it doesn't produce a Condorcet winner, which basically means that they would win in each head-to-head competition. It fails the consistency criterion. The consistency criterion being that it states that if you divide an electorate into 2 groups and then run the same election separately with each group, returning the same results back together, that you would get the same result. Doesn't fit that category. It fails the independence of irrelevant alternatives criteria. Basically, the election outcome remains the same even if a candidate who cannot win decides to run. In the general case, instant runoff voting can be susceptible to, strategic nomination. Whether or not a candidate decides to run at all can affect the result, even if a new candidate cannot themselves win. And furthermore, it fails the reversal symmetry, where basically if candidate A, is a unique winner, and each voter's individual preferences are then inverted, basically reversed, that A, therefore, could not be possibly elected. So these are some of the things that are definitely some downsides, but I'm still somewhat open to ranked choice voting because it does have a lot of momentum of alternative voting methods. And then, furthermore, I definitely agree with things like needing to improve the metrics of our economy. I personally am a big fan of the most recent piece of legislation proposed by Ilhan Omar in the GPI Act that we previously have covered here on the channel. And I will also say this isn't the first time either that this has been something that has been championed by the Democratic Party. You had in 2019 even, only last Congress, you had Chuck Schumer, and I believe another Democratic senator, I'm forgetting offhand, proposed this act called the Measuring Real Income Growth Act to try and fix the economic metrics we use to really see how the economy is working for us all. So there's definitely been this kind of call for these actions. But I am definitely a fan of trying to fix the way we measure our economy. And obviously, modernizing government is a must, especially taxation. I'm lucky I finally got a notice from the IRS now saying in 3 to 5 weeks I'm going to get my tax return finally. But it has been a hellish process for so many this year, mainly because our government is so antiquated and is adding all this extra administration that is not properly funding. So I definitely agree. We need to modernize government. So all of these key objectives, I definitely can agree with. And I mean, even grace and tolerance as an objective, I think has use cases in some scenarios. I think it's one of those things that is going to be largely a gray area in how far you go with it. So I agree with it in principle, but I do worry that sometimes it may be used to excuse bad behavior that shouldn't be excused. So when it comes to this party versus other third parties, my general sentiment is that this party does a couple things that I think are strategically beneficial compared to some other third party efforts. One, it is much more focused on non-candidate organizing methods. So their first objective being ballot initiatives, I think can go a long way, where they can talk to candidates about, instead of a specific person that they have to recruit who comes with potentially their own baggage, just the issue. And I think that can go really well across party lines. So I think that's a big thing, that they have very specific ballot initiatives that they're going to look to target. I also think it's beneficial, and this will be controversial for some people, I think it's beneficial that it is generally a little bit more of a centrist party. Not that it is necessarily to the right of the Democratic Party, but that it is trying to be a party that is inclusive of everyone, and it is trying to do it in branding terms that are more popular with the general consensus. I have minor tweaks here and there of, like, he went back from calling it human-centered economics like he did as a mayor or as a mayoral candidate, to now calling it human-centered capitalism again, which not the best idea if you want to recruit younger people into a third party who are increasingly dissatisfied with capitalism and are the base that are most interested in third parties. But I think this notion of having kind of a more centrist branding alleviates some, not all, but some of the concerns that this might have a spoiler impact. And, over time, Yang's base has alluded to the point that it's basically become a little bit more conservative in nature. And so for the people worried about him leaving the Democratic Party and starting a new party, at this point, I don't know if it's going to be much of a spoiler, because the base that he has had has shifted a lot in the past year. One of the reasons we supported him was he was a big progressive champion of a lot of ideas. And we feel like he's even shifted a little bit to the right on some issues during this past year, but we've still been somewhat supportive. Furthermore, the races that he's going to be targeting with resources, they're looking for races specifically that are, ranked choice voting, alternative voting methods, and open. That way they have a more competitive chances, so they're not wasting resources. And I think, furthermore, taking this kind of mindset of being not as antagonistic to Democrats and Republicans, but trying to kind of be the group that helps these sides work together in some respect, can be positive in just as a recruiting method. I think people are going to be much more open to an alternative party if they're being told that their current party is not evil, but that it's just not embracing solutions that are needed. And so maybe that can have a positive effect. And, compared to all these other parties, Yang is by far going to have more mainstream media connections to talk about his party than the People's Party, the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, the Constitution Party, what have you. We could see that even with just the announcement of this new party and all the attention it's getting on mainstream media networks like CNN. Obviously, he had connections to CNN from being a pundit there, but that's exactly the appeal that it's going to have, is more people are going to just hear about it compared to a lot of these other parties. So I think, frankly, despite being new and not having all the infrastructure set up of like some of these existing third parties, I do believe this is going to be a better third party than a lot of those. Not only because it aligns on a policy level, but strategically, I think it has the ability to recruit a bigger tent into the fold. But that being said, I want to now turn to some of the aspects that I'm a little bit more critical about. and talk a little bit about like the timeline of how we've even gotten to this point. So a little bit on the timeline of advocacy for Andrew Yang in the past year. So first, a little over a year and a half ago, in 2020, he dropped out of the presidential primary around February. He then started out, trying to gather himself and what he wanted to do. He put out criteria that in order to endorse someone, they had to endorse the specific policies that he was backing of universal basic income. And he also founded Humanity Forward with the intent of trying to keep the movement alive, being a PAC to influence campaigns so candidates who support their goals are more likely to be elected, as well as doing cash relief programs to various districts with a 501c3 organization separated from the C4. At this point, Humanity Forward had done millions in cash relief. They have done a PAC that had roughly 80% of its spending go towards contributions to other campaigns and organizations, roughly around $400K in total, of which 75% of those contributions, so 75% of that 80%, went to the DNC itself, compared to 25% going to endorsed candidates. After he was running Humanity Forward, he decided, I think it was around April, to endorse Joe Biden before the Democratic primary truly ended. Like, Bernie Sanders at that point was mostly defeated. Projections were he had like a 1% chance of being able to win. But it was not technically over. Bernie had not resigned yet. He had not dropped out. And Yang decided to make this decision because he felt at the time it was necessary to unite the Democratic Party against the threat that was Trumpism. And so to do that, he wanted to call it a little bit earlier in the race to try and help unite the party. He then goes on to start writing this book that he wrote, the Forward, Notes on the Future of Our Democracy. He then attends the DNC convention after, originally complaining that he was not included, which I might note that maybe there is some financial conflicts of interest there to degrees. Like, the timing on some of the donations from the Humanity Forward PAC to the DNC were somewhat suspicious, and $150,000 of the total $283,000 being donated right before the convention, and him then saying, I really thought I was expecting to speak. It did seem like he was making those donations possibly with the intent of influencing favor to get himself a platform at the convention. So it definitely seems like he's trying to ingratiate himself to the party, trying to unite the party against the threat of Trumpism. He ends up then becoming a surrogate for Joe Biden in Pennsylvania. He goes on to tell a friend of his in Justin Amash that he thinks it makes no sense to be trying to run as a third party until democracy reform things like ranked choice voting are passed. And he issues this being one of the reasons we should be backing Joe Biden is because the system is set up as such. He then goes and campaigns in Georgia because he understands the threat of having those two Republican seats be held in the Senate compared to Warnock and Ossoff. It was the difference between getting some cash relief in the stimulus bill that occurred in 2021 and no cash relief. We can gripe all day about it being $1,400 instead of $2,000, but it was included versus not included. And every single Republican voted against that bill. And, well, we had enough votes to get it passed anyway because we had Democrats instead of Republicans in those seats. Then he decides to hop into the mayor's race, a little bit to my chagrin. I had personally told him he shouldn't do that. I personally told him he should accept the Joe Biden admin role that he told us here on our program in an interview that he was in talks with the Biden administration for. He includes that in his book as well, that was something that he was being considered for as well. And I wanted him to take that role to get the coveted government experience that so many voters really want, especially Democrats. But he chooses to go into the mayor's race instead. I really wanted him to take that admin role and then turn around and run for governor, but that's a whole other conversation. But he runs for mayor. He ends up starting the race as the front runner in the race, and over time, eventually craters to fourth place and finishing with roughly 11% of the total vote as first place votes. And so then he eventually, drops out, and he had made these plans to do the release of his book and start this new third party. I see some of the problems in this journey being that he clearly had a very different mindset for the beginning of 2020. And then it seems like things mainly only changed once the mayoral race ended. He has stated at times that he was writing this book throughout 2020 and then was finalizing it to go out the door after the race. It seems like most of it, for the most part, was in 2020. I don't know if that last chapter, the chapter on the Forward Party, was included until after that race. But the appearance of the timing is giving a lot of people this notion that it's kind of, a little bit of a sore loser impact. And I think some of these decisions along the way kind of reinforces that belief that if you were going to go this way, there was going to be better ways to do it. It definitely seemed like you were going for the team player approach. I'm a loyal Democrat the whole way through in 2020, making most of the contributions that the Yang Gang gave you to the DNC, not to the candidates we wanted endorsed, but to the DNC, serving on Joe Biden's admin, telling people in the media to vote for, in Yang Gang media, to vote for Joe Biden because you think you will be in the admin, and then running for mayor without little time to build up the infrastructure for that race, and not having been much of an active participant in local politics, and having spent the summer away in New Paltz to do campaigning for Biden, weren't the best approaches. We could have been patient. We could have been pushing for it in 2022. We could have been using 2021 to continue the focus on stimulus pushes. But it felt like we went off track. And I do feel like I have some concerns about the efficacy of the time being used in a outside approach, a third-party approach, compared to taking some of these ideas and continuing to grow them in the Democratic Party, where they currently have far more support than it does with any Republicans or with non-voters who might start participating, who are independents. So I genuinely feel like Yang has a little bit of this issue of almost toxically going too much into both sidism. Now, granted, there are cases where both sides are perpetrators of a problem. I do not deny this. We are seeing problems under the Biden admin that existed under the Trump admin, that existed under the Obama admin, that then existed under the Bush admin. We've had these problems for a while, regardless of admin, Democrat, Republican. But he turns it into almost too much for any issue. That's the problems of both the fringe left and the fringe right on almost every issue. And that the problem with Republicans is that they are more falling in line with the incentives of the system than Democrats do. And that's what they're going wrong, because the system is flawed rather than the Republicans being the one who are causing that system potentially. So, when I asked Andrew Yang personally why he didn't address intolerance of conservatives in his book, but repeatedly criticized progressives for their intolerance to conservatives in his book, Yang claims that he simply did. I read his book. He did not. He can talk about general claims of racism that were in the book and bigotry, but he never, by name, called it conservatism. He can talk about their doubts and their skepticisms about the fairness of election, but he never says inherently that there is a problem with conservatism that is causing any of these issues. He's treating them like they're byproducts rather than inherent to some of the ideology. When he discusses these problems, I have to wonder if he's reading some of the news, whether it be issues like voter suppression that we regularly cover, whether it be issues like banning education on race in schools, whether it be the rampant COVID-19 denialism and the banning of masks in schools, which predominantly has been taking place in Trump districts, and vaccination has been lower for conservatives overall in polling. You can talk about how 75% of Republicans believe the election was stolen, Most of these like anti-duopolistic forces within the Republican base are mainly frustrated that the GOP leaders didn't help steal the election for Trump. So I have questions there. There's the bigotry attempts against the LGBTQ community and immigrant Americans that we're seeing across states that are actively trying to target and separate into out groups, especially trans individuals and immigrants. We can talk about their efforts to inspire vigilantism against doctors providing abortion services to women who just want to have a choice of their own body. There's no discussion over this general notion within conservative culture of just own the libs. It's seen as if there's only this vindictiveness in Yang's head that the left are the only people all outraged over certain stuff and trying to cancel people, when that's just not the case. And I have to wonder how much of that just comes from Yang's own experience when he drifted right and started to be called out on it. At the beginning of his New York City mayoral race, the guy was leading among liberals. That was the core group of his base. Towards the end of his race, however, it dropped off significantly. At the end of his race, here are the groupings for each ideological score. So 11% of voters in New York City who were very liberal wanted Yang. 9% who were liberal wanted Yang. 19% who were moderate wanted Yang. And 15% who were conservative or very conservative wanted Yang. So you could tell at the end, his base were the moderates and conservatives in New York City. But when you compare that to 2020, same polling organizations, this is now at the end of that 2020 race, who was Yang's base? Yang's base was 57% liberal versus 53.4% on average for Dems. He was 32.7% moderate compared to the higher 35.2% average among Dems. And among conservatives, he had 10.3% support from conservatives compared to 11.4% for the average Dem. Andrew Yang was a liberal. He was a progressive. He even said in many books that he thought he was going to be perceived as to the left of Bernie Sanders. But he pivoted. He pivoted with a lot of the advice of his consulting groups in Tusk, the people who ran former campaigns for the likes of Bloomberg. It caused him to pivot on some issues, like when it came to worker rights classifications with groups like Uber. It came with how he treated taxing the rich in the race. I imagine it's largely somewhat influential on how he started to discuss policing in that race. There was a variety of things where you could tell over time he was starting to moderate. But, people would push back and say, but John, he was also starting to become more liberal on some issues too. He was becoming much more liberal on certain identity politics issues. He was becoming more liberal on allowing undocumented immigrants to vote. He was trying to do a lot of these more ambitious policies too. But a lot of those things were not the things that are the mainstream popular positions of those groups. They're generally not the big core issues. And some of these more hot button issues are the things that he went a little bit more conservative on. So it's kind of like not enough of a bone to throw people when you're giving them the toxic stuff they don't want as well. And now, maybe these are his real positions. Maybe he learned more from the experience, and this is genuinely what he believes compared to messaging he was given from strategists who were consultants. A little doubtful, being that I got to watch a lot of the strategy calls that they had with the press, but I'll take it from there. He may have been genuine in it. One way or another, he pivoted to the right, and the base started to reflect that. And I think he now, even in that pivot, he's starting to kind of now get into the mindset of pointing to the extremes and saying we need to have more bipartisanship again and working together without fundamentally ever grappling with the concern over some of the bad cases of bipartisanship either. Like, if you're talking about how polarization is the problem, you have to also talk about where is our expectation for bipartisanship currently? If we want to get people back together working and that's better, tell us why. Because I can think of a couple reasons where they work together and it's pretty poor. You can talk about the military budget growing significantly higher over and over, regardless of party. You can talk about NSA surveillance and the invasion of privacy that we have. We can talk about keeping torture facilities open like Guantanamo Bay. We can talk about Wall Street bailouts. We can talk for uncritical support and basically funding of Israel despite internationally condemned settlement practices. We can talk about the routine prosecution of whistleblowers. There's a lot of issues that are bad when both parties are agreeing. And furthermore, when you look at these quote-unquote centrists, the non-polarized people in America, I look at the Joe Manchins of the world and the Kirsten Sinemas of the world. Are they really helping us get these agendas accomplished? All I see is obstruction to the stimulus that we've all claimed we wanted. When it comes to helping the American people get out of poverty, all I see is the people in the middle wanting to do not enough. That's what I see right now. And so I ask, what is the appeal of trying to get that middle point? It just seems like we're not providing nearly enough. My contention is that we need to be trying to be a united Democratic Party, which is what Andrew Yang thought was necessary in 2020. He was right then, and I think he's more wrong now. You know, when we look at what Democratic unity can bring to us, I say look to history. The two periods of time where the Democratic Party was the most united in government was between 1933 to 1947, as well as from 1961 to 1969. During these periods of time, that first period, we accomplished the New Deal and Social Security. In that second period, we accomplished the Voting Rights Act and Medicare and Medicaid. These are the things that we get to accomplish when we are united as a party against these conservative factions, instead of just trying to work with them. We accomplish great things when the party is stronger against conservatism, and they are just unviable. When we look at some of these objectives of the Forward Party, I say look to who is currently championing them between the two parties. Should we be looking to have both parties or champion one of them? Every single mayor, every single one of them who is for a guaranteed income is a Democrat. Every recurring cash relief proposal in Congress and co-sponsor is a Democrat. The only permanent basic income bill in Congress is by Democrat Ilhan Omar with the Support Act. This bill was championed by Democratic senators in the 1970s. It was championed by hundreds of liberal economists. You know, we have these famous conservative cases that Yang likes to bring up a lot that are just frankly oversimplified. Milton Friedman, famous conservative economist that he quotes for basic income, was for a negative income tax, and B, the intention of it was to gut the welfare system. He intended to do it as a way of streamlining it and bringing all these programs together, and then gutting it so that we could get people off welfare. We know this because when thousands of economists were trying to gather petition signatures for a guaranteed income in the 1970s, he refused to sign. Like, I don't know how we can get this more clear. He had a different objective. It wasn't to end poverty. And then the second one, Alaska. We always point, red state Alaska is the one with the dividend. That's the real UBI. One, I'm not opposing this necessarily, but it is a different proposal, a dividend versus a universal basic income. One is to try and provide a standard amount of money so that you have your basic needs taken care of. And the other is just making you more of a shareholder in your economy so that you get some output of the productivity. They're different goals. They're fine in different ways, but they're different. And furthermore, the intention, again, matters. When this was being pushed through by Republicans, the intention was not, again, poverty alleviation. The intention was to reward long-term residents and punish immigrants. They had restrictions to give out more money to people who were long-term residents and to not provide it to people who were only there short-term. Now, this got struck down in the courts, and it eventually became a more fair dividend. But that was the intention of the law. And so if we're going to talk about Republicans being these champions, you got to look at what the intentions were when they were championing these things. They weren't doing it to help poverty relief, which is the goal, to provide that liberty to people to pursue the lives that they want. It is to undermine them. And so I question whether or not we want to be saying, oh, let's give credit to all these places. When it comes to things like ranked choice voting, one of the big measures that Yang champions, in 2021, there were 78 bills across the states on ranked choice voting. 70 of those bills were by Democrats. 8 were by Republicans. I'll give some credit to them. You got Tim Dunn from Arizona, Stephen Meredith in Kentucky, Mark Curran and David Osmek in Minnesota, Ken McCarthy in Mississippi, Dan Stacy in Missouri, Andrew Lanza in New York, and Mike Winder, Jeffrey Stenquist, and Curtis Bramble in Utah. So they do exist, but when you look at that proportion, 70 of 78 are the Democratic Party. Most people who are championing this are Democrats. By far, without a doubt, the only bill in Congress for ranked choice voting is by a Democrat. And so I really have no understanding of why he doesn't feel like there's a base already advocating that and trying to push that and grow ranks. I already mentioned the fact-based governance thing. You have the GPI Act that Ilhan Omar just proposed. You had the Measuring Real Income Growth Act of 2019 proposed by Chuck Schumer. So I don't see the appeal that he's trying to go for other than trying to appeal to conservatives. And frankly, it is of my opinion that we should be trying to reduce the appeal and power of conservatives rather than doing what the Nancy Pelosi's of the world and the Andrew Yangs are saying is just, let's try and build up these moderate conservatives into power again and have them be real leaders in the movement. I don't see that as the proper tactics because I see the goal as a little bit bigger than just these two issues. I see there's more to the platform that we're championing in universal basics, and so I'm skeptical. Now, luckily for me, according to Yang, I'm allowed to still be part of the coalition. I'm not a forward-ish, forward party member, but I'm a forward Democrat, according to him. And, I wish nothing but success in the advocacy goals that Yang and his team are pursuing. The efficacy of it, I have my significant doubts compared to just keeping the organization of Humanity Forward like it was as a PAC and trying to influence. Similar to how you had Justice Democrats do this. We need people who are willing to just not try and be their own entity, but try and work across these entities. I agree with that. But I think that the notion of it being a political party is going to cause some people potentially to be leaving the base and focusing on trying to defeat Republicans, essentially. And I feel like this both-sidism is going to be dangerous. Now, I'm not going to be some soothsayer, predict the future, what is the true impact. I'm just expressing some of my concerns of why I don't feel like the time is being utilized well, and some of the lapses in judgment in trying to build up this movement, and what feels like to me a little bit of a large change in tune this past couple weeks compared to his past approaches of how he saw these issues. I wish them well, though. I really, really do. I am not a hater of third parties. I am just a little bit of a cynic, and I see when it comes to things like democracy reform, you got one party who is actively trying to push democracy reform measures like the For the People Act, like the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, like ranked choice voting throughout the states. And then you got the other, which just is trying to make it so less people can vote. When you look at the popular vote results for these past 8 elections, 7 out of the 8 have been won by Democrats, and yet the frickin' results of the actual elections are basically even. It's like we are in a system where we are not following popular will, and we are having a tyranny of the minority. And I don't think that we're properly recognizing the threat that the Republican Party causes and how much they shift the Overton window for Democrats too, to be a more conservative party than a lot of them would hope they could be. So I think that he should have stayed in the Democratic Party. I think he could have done a lot of good trying to get into more of the voter registration role post-campaign. He should have taken the Biden admin offer. Originally, he told me to my face that's one of the reasons we should vote for Biden, because he's going to be part of it. So I was very disappointed when he completely pivoted and ran in a race that he didn't have a high chance in. But I wanted to support him, and I'm still going to support him because I do believe in these democracy reform measures and anti-poverty measures, but I do have serious reservations about this new method. I hope you enjoyed me sharing my thoughts today. I hope I can hear what you think about the new Forward Party in the comment section down below. I want to thank Andrew Yang again for sharing an early copy of his book with me so that I can read his thoughts, as well as answering all of my private questions that I had to him about his new party effort so that I could come to you all with a fair assessment of what I really feel about it. It really means a lot to me that he would be willing to have that open dialogue, even when I've expressed concerns at times, as well as some degrees of criticism at some decisions. I also just want to reiterate to people, ranked choice voting is not the end-all, be-all of voting methods. Look to the New York City mayoral election for a lot of the proof of why it's having some issues. Like, it doesn't have the expirability, essentially, that you automatically have over 50% of the vote on one candidate, because people just don't fill out all the 5 options on their ballot when they do ranked choice voting. You can look to how it was still a very negative campaigning environment. You can look to how it didn't save a lot of money when it came to like TV ads or anything like that. And as such, we can definitely see that there are some limitations to the process that it possesses. And so we should look at methods like star voting, approval voting, and score voting. Finally, I want to thank you all for watching. This might have seemed a little rambly at times, but I appreciate you caring to hear my perspective and the perspective of the People's Basics Network. So this is going to conclude another video here at the home of the Universal Basics, the People's Basics. We will see you all next time.